Screw the introductions, you can read the title. Pokemon is a series I have a lot of issues with, and so I think the best way to basically talk about what I would do in order to make the series great again and really capitalize on the aspect of pawning of Pokemon is to make this video. Ready? Okay, good, let's go! I've always been a fan of the GameCube games, most notably the first title, Pokemon Colosseum. It was actually a breath of fresh air since you weren't subjected to the standard fare of, you are a 10-year-old kid who's off to save the region and become the champion. No, none of that! Nullamente! Instead, you were this badass former member of an evil team, Team Snag'em, who was defecting from the rest of the team and making off with their snag machine that was used to steal other people's Pokemon. That's awesome! It's a shame that this concept was dropped from the series and never touched again. Not so awesome! So my idea was to expand on this. You aren't necessarily the good guy, but you're not the bad guy. If anything, you're the noble thief kind of character in a region that's run by an oppressive Pokemon League, quite possibly in a country where the government is corrupt, and in which almost everyone is a criminal in a sense, and stealing people's Pokemon. Obviously that would include you, and with the exception of your starter, you'd be forced to steal other trainers' Pokemon in order to grow your roster. And they wouldn't be Shadow Pokemon, but regular ones. Mainly due to how the region is built, getting wild Pokemon is a rarity, so imagine it being in the same vein as Ori, with the majority of the region being covered in harsh desert. That makes it hard to traverse by foot and not really a good idea to go Pokemon hunting in the desert. There are exceptions, but maybe we'll get to that later. So now we got the bases done, let's talk about the mechanics. Stealing Pokemon from other trainers, especially from people who aren't the greatest of people, sounds pretty awesome. Of course, I'd like to point out there's another side to this, and that's you can lose your Pokemon. Not to say you yourself can have your Pokemon stolen, but rather your Pokeballs can be broken. Let's face it, these things are fragile. Hell, you throw one of these things and you ain't getting it back.
Pokeball, let's go!
You lied to me again, Game Freak! I'm gonna start a consumer revolt on Twitter! Getting away from crippling depression for a second, every time your Pokemon faints, the Pokeball takes damage. And depending on the type of ball you have, the more damage it can take. Spitballing off the top of my head, regular Pokeballs can take 2 hits before breaking, Great Balls take 3, and I think you get the picture. Once a Pokeball breaks, your Pokemon is gone. In a sense, this is a branched out version from the traditional Nuzlocke. And people seem to like that, like holy hell! So yeah, if you're not careful with your Pokemon, you can lose them. That alone is a prospect that can make you want to actually consider what you want to do with your monsters and prevent the player from actually being careless with their team compositions. Obviously this would be a hard game, but let's push this a bit further. One of the best ways that people are able to connect with their Pokemon, especially in a 3D game, is that you're able to interact with your Pokemon, even if they're limited in ways. There's a reason why people go insane when you can pet the dog in games. Even if it's just feeding your Pokemon or petting them, they make you somewhat closer to your digital companions. But how are we going to cultivate this in a game? Well, let's cut something. Since we're in a region that's filled with bad guys, I don't really see Pokemon centers being a huge thing, especially considering that Pokemon centers would probably be targeted for criminals. So the idea is that you'd have places where you could camp out. This could be empty buildings, hotels, whatever you can think of. It'd probably be scenes where you can hang out with your Pokemon, make them meals other than curry, and essentially bonding with your critters. And obviously you'd also have follow Pokemon as well. Even just walking with your Pokemon can have similar effect to having you get close to them. Because hey, you can just turn around and see how they're doing. They'd get you some items and react depending on your location. The more you can interact with your Pokemon, the better in this situation. I did toy with the idea of your character dying or your Pokemon dying, but I think it's more heartbreaking that your Pokemon, a Pokemon you possibly saved from someone bad, sees you just as bad as them and runs away from you if you treat them worse. Now obviously, just because a Pokeball is damaged, that doesn't mean you're on a tight rope. Stuff like repair kits could be a thing. They'd probably cost an arm and a leg, but it's something that would also help out with your Pokemon. Another idea is that you could transfer Pokemon into new balls, but that would also be a process that costs you a bunch of money. I also think there'd be more utility with Pokemon moves. And no, I'm not suggesting we bring back HMs, but regular moves that could be used in the overworld. Because it adds more utility to your Pokemon and thus strengthens the bond you have with them, since your Pokemon is actively helping you out with surveying the land. And the same can be said with your follow Pokemon. Like if you're in a park with lots of trees and you got a grass Pokemon following you, they'll alert you if there's a hidden item or grotto nearby, but won't be overly specific since you gotta find it yourself and have the right move in order to access it. The idea is to have you rely on your Pokemon and thus get closer to them. Obviously, trainers would also be spawning and refresh their team so that if you lose a Pokemon, you at least have a chance to get a new replacement. Of course, there's a big problem that I could see, and that's you have the possibility of losing all your Pokemon in a battle. Now, first off, if that's the case, but considering that I've given the players chances to not only repair their Pokeballs, transfer your Pokemon into new Pokeballs, but also the PC system would still be there, I think you people would have enough chance to survive. Now, considering there wouldn't be a lot of wild Pokemon to battle, we're skipping the prospect of grinding. But Kamen, how are we going to power up our Pokemon? I'm glad you asked that, Strawman, because you are the one who will seek out the challenge. The idea is, with the exception of some more story-related trainers, or in dungeons, or legendary Pokemon, trainers don't immediately come up to battle you. No, you gotta be the one to challenge them in order to get your team toughen up. It's a page taken out from Lisa the Painful, where you have to go searching for the bosses, and something similar would be implemented here. As for the battling aspect, I'm fine with how the battle system of Pokemon works. The only thing I complain about is the opposing Pokemon needed to be more varied and not so type-centric. What I mean is, no monotype teams, or at the very least the monotypes are at least competently made useful. Like a water-type trainer would have things like a Ludicolo, Whiscash, and other water types that make it so you just can't take their entire team down with a single Pokemon. So instead of there being a gym system, you'd be taking down head honchos of the league's criminal family. Like, you'd be going after the mafia that's got a hold on the region. Linear, non-linear, I don't know. If linear, just do the same thing that Pokemon's doing right now with its gym challenge. Like, have the bosses be lined up in a specific way. Non-linear? Maybe take some notes from that Pokemon Crystal Clear Edition ROM hack where the gym leaders' teams and levels are scaled depending on your progression. Probably a bitch and a half the program, though.
Here's a good idea. Have a point.
So that's my idea for a Pokemon game that would break your heart, with you saving Pokemon, getting close to said Pokemon, and possibly losing them if you screw up. But those are just one man's thoughts. Do with them as you wish. I know I will. Bye!
And give her our utmost attention. Attention and file. March for miles to share our love with the stars above. We mean it duly, cause it's our duty to salute your beauty. Wow. Nobody gets another out of town. Yeah. There's no denial. You leave us stifled with your radiant smile. Yeah. Move to the beat. You better put on your goggles, cause we're gonna bring the heat. Cruise with me. There's lots to see.